I'm not here to point, good and bad and everything. I mean, even in my cultural traditions, I mean, I have, European cultural traditions. I mean, we could pick out some things that aren't so desirable.
Right.
But I want to focus on the positives. And when I speak to Native Americans, there are so many things in their cultural traditions that are positive that help all of us.
So did they have a basic plant-based diet? I mean, you usually think of Indians out there on the back of a horse or a buffalo shooting another buffalo or this or that, and many times you see these pictures and all going and getting the kill. Was it a plant-based diet, or was there a lot of meat in the diet?
This was a shock to me, Don. When I started working more with Native Americans in Oklahoma, and I have to tell you, I really had very little experience with Native Americans before I moved to Oklahoma and to the Lifestyle Center of America. But I started visiting, reading historical documents, traveling, speaking on reservations, like I've said. It's amazing. Throughout the country, I mean, you look at the coastal Indians on the northeast, the southeast. You look at the Indians in Wichita, you mentioned. There's an early account of a Spanish explorer in the 1500s who comes into Kansas. You think, the plains? Yeah, buffalo, right? Indians, bows and arrows and rifles on horses, right? Catching the buffalo? Hey, those were all European introductions. The rifle and the horse? Traditionally, what did the Spaniards find? They found fields of corn and squash and an agriculturally based society. In the desert, in Arizona, the whole desert was irrigated. The Hohokam people, the ancestors of the Pimas, had that whole desert irrigated. Aerial photographs of the Phoenix River Basin today still show shadowy lines of irrigation canals. It's amazing. Agriculturally based. But then, when the Europeans came, yes, some of the Plains Indians shifted their diet to a meat-based diet when they could hunt much more efficiently with horses and guns.
Interesting. So now some people that are listening today say, wait a minute, not only do I disagree, and you already cleared up this disagreement, that maybe they're plant-based, and you've certainly spoken to that eloquently, but they might say, I'm a Christian, and even in the Bible it doesn't say I can't eat meat. What do you say to a person like that?
You know what? At the Lifestyle Center of America, Don, we never tell anyone they can't eat meat. People come to us because they have medical problems. And we say, look, we have you here for maybe 19 days. That's the longest program we offer. We say, look, we want to see the maximum results in the shortest time. And we do use that plant-based diet, a vegetarian diet, because that, in our experience, and in the medical research that we've reviewed and some of the research we've done, that gives quick results. When people go back home, I've had Native Americans who have gone home and they follow a total vegetarian diet. There was a woman, a Sioux woman, they refer to themselves as Lakota. She actually went back to her tribe. She had me speak out there on her reservation, and she adapted a total vegetarian diet to all the foods that were readily accessible there in her culture. Other Native Americans have gone back and they say, look, it's important for me to have some wild game. But you know what? Wild game is actually very low in fat. Buffalo, you have any idea how much fat is in buffalo meat, percentage-wise?
I have.
You want to hazard a guess?
You mean wild buffalo meat?
Yeah, wild buffalo, wild
Are there
game.
even wild buffaloes left?
There are, and I mean, you got to, they're protected, like in natural protected areas.
I wouldn't probably eat it because I'd be afraid of the disease and different things. It's not really inspected.
Well, I wasn't trying to get you to eat it. I was trying to hazard a guess as to how much fat is in their tissue.
What would you say?
Well, let me give you a frame of reference.
I don't know.
Lean ground beef, baked. Okay. Extra lean ground beef.
All right.
Only about 60% fat. Okay.
Oh, so...
so what do you think buffalo
40.
rates in it? 15.
15% fat.
That's all. So, I mean, if you were going to choose meat, and you're watching your fat consumption, which is very important when it comes to diabetes, animal fat seems to be a factor in the development of diabetes. Hey, if you're going to eat fat, yes, wild game is really a pretty good choice. Deer is less than 20% fat. Now, we still have some concerns.
Sure.
Because there are other risks.
Diseases and different things.
Yeah, sure, like you've mentioned. But still, Native Americans, even the wild game they ate, was very low in fat. It wasn't the chips, it wasn't the lard. This was not what they were raised on traditionally.
We're talking with Dr. David DeRose from the Lifestyle Center of America. He's been doing some fascinating research on the Native American diet and how it's related to God's principles as seen in Scripture, but even more interesting, or at least as interesting as that being the same thing that science is telling us today. And when we come back, we're going to look a little further at that. How can we have the Native American benefits? How can we avoid any pitfalls that they came across in their particular culture? Join us when we come back. Welcome back. We've been talking with Dr. David DeRose about Native Americans and really about their health practices. And this is fascinating research that you've started to uncover. Evidently, they had a predominantly plant-based food, or very low in fat if they were having wild game. And they had a lot of the health practices that really lead to positive things today. Now, you mentioned that they now, in the, as we're living now, they have a lot of problems with diabetes and a lot of the problems with other illnesses. Are there any other illnesses besides diabetes that they seem to suffer from?
Well, I mean, the group, like I mentioned earlier, that has been most well studied are the Pima Indians, and their weight concerns and diabetes as far as chronic diseases. And then, of course, the substance abuse issues have also loomed large in Native populations. So these issues, though, are things that affect you and I as
Right.
well. I mean, whether we have obesity or diabetes diagnoses, we all are at risk for this, because as we tend to get older, we tend to put on weight, and with weight comes the risk for diabetes. So I think as we talk about these conditions, there's something that is applicable to everyone, regardless of what their cultural background is.
So we should all be thinking about a plant-based diet like they have in their cultural past.
Yeah, I should mention one other thing, because a lot of people, still may be a little skeptical. Very interesting study, 1994, the journal Diabetes Care. Researchers from the National Institutes of Health there in Phoenix, Arizona, traveled down to Mexico, and they found another cultural group, Native Americans, that were from the same ancestry as the Pimas in Arizona. Two Pima groups, basically. Pimas in Arizona, Pimas in Mexico. The Pimas in Mexico were on a very different lifestyle. High fiber diet, more active, and interestingly, very interestingly, eating meat only about once every month or two. I mean, basically a vegetarian diet. What they found in the men, for example, average man in his 40s, in the Pimas in Arizona, over 50% of them had diabetes. Less than 10%, well under 10% of those in Mexico. Yes, they had a genetic predisposition, but lifestyle makes a huge difference. And that's the message, whether it's heart disease or stroke or diabetes or weight. We can't reverse all the genetics, but we can make a big difference with our lifestyle. And Native American traditional practices gave these people tremendous health. That's what the record suggests. But now it's adopting these Western practices that have contributed to this decline in health status.
This is the same thing that we've seen with the studies of rural China and all these different things. But the interesting thing about this is it's right here on this continent.
That's
probably.
Right. That's exactly right.
What about Native Americans and their ability to say yes or no to certain substances, so-called temperance?
This is really interesting, Don. There was a famous French explorer named Lemoyne, Jacques Lemoyne. And he came to what's modern-day Florida before the Spanish had come there. His party came there, and he observed Native Americans really for the first time, these native peoples there. And the accounts that he wrote about them are fascinating. Not only did he write historical descriptions, but he made some beautiful watercolor illustrations that were then reproduced by another Frenchman, Theodore de Bry, into copper plate engravings. These have stood the test of time. We have these today. I've seen many of these illustrations. A number of them show Native Americans eating. And Lemoyne says things like this. These native peoples, he didn't call them native peoples. I got to tell you, he often used terms that...
Derogatory.
Very derogatory. He mentions these derogatory terms like, I don't need to mention them, but he says things like this. They never overate. We Christians would be well to learn lessons of sobriety from these people that we consider in such derogatory terms.
Amazing.
It's amazing. He's saying, look at, and he said, these people are so long-lived. They have such long lives because they're temperate in their eating. I'll tell you, it's a powerful lesson, and it's something that I believe God wants to give Christians power over, as you and I have talked before.
So how did we get in this predicament of being, a Christian nation or a Christian people, and you're a Christian, I'm a Christian minister. Why is it that so many Christians have a problem with this very area? Why is it that they have used their very religion, it seems, in a way that harms themselves?
Well, you know what? This is the irony. As I talk about like traditional Native American practices with Christians, they say, hey, I don't want to do anything to do with that. That wasn't Bible-based, you see? Or, did you hear who's a vegetarian? It's, some of these people in these, and they use some derogatory terms, not Christian. Okay. So if I'm going to be a vegetarian, then I'm not really going to be a Christian because the Christians aren't doing that. You know what the irony is to me? Native Americans do the same thing. Let me tell you, just a parallel explanation, parallel situation. You go into some Native American communities, and what are their traditional foods? Fried bread, dough fed in lard. Where did the lard and the fat come from, okay? This wasn't part of their traditional foods before European influence, but it's now become their tradition. They identify with this as part of their cultural identity. Christians do the same thing. They say, this is what we do in our church. This is what we do in our fellowship meals. We're not going to be like these non-Christians and eat like that. What I'm saying is, hey, wait a minute. Jesus came to give us abundant life. If he tells me to change my lifestyle, I'm not going to look around and who else is doing it or who's not doing it. And what the medical research is showing us, and what Native American practices show us in a group of people who've got the odds stacked against some chronic diseases like obesity and diabetes, it shows us that Genesis diet, that Genesis lifestyle of moderate, useful exercise that God gave Adam and Eve in the garden, of a plant-based diet, of a trusting relationship with the Creator, of a stress-free existence. These things are things that we need today. And it doesn't matter if indigenous Australian, the Aborigines are adopting them or have practiced them. It doesn't matter if the Chinese have done this traditionally and from a perspective that didn't incorporate Christ. Many of these indigenous peoples knew their body better than we Westerners do. And who created our bodies? God. So these people have insights into the way the Creator made them, and they live that way traditionally. So why should we distance ourselves from those practices as Christians?
Sure, we should just build on them. So they believe in the Creator. They're very much into, protecting the earth and their own bodies in their cultural history. You've kind of made them aware of this, and it's probably an aha experience for them. They are temperate in terms of these things that you've seen in the artwork. What about exercise?
Exercise is very interesting. Exercise today for many Americans is either something to avoid, or if a person's exercising, it's with great fervor and religiosity. I exercise 45 minutes a day, and I check my pulse, and I see what it is.
Kind of an obsessive compulsive type thing.
Now don't misunderstand. I'm not depreciating that, but what Native Americans did is exercise was a part of their daily life. It wasn't something they did. They exercised as part of their life. They were physically active people. Even in some of their ceremonies, they were physically active.
Their dances and all that.
Okay. Not just dances. They even had organized sports in the Southwest. They had ball courts that had both physical fitness and religious connotations. Some very interesting parallels. What I tell people today, not that we've got to, build Native American ball courts and, start playing out there in some kind of worship ritual. What I tell people, Don, is we need to make exercise a part of our daily routine. It's just like you don't get up in the morning and say, boy, am I going to eat today? Now, you could choose to fast, but isn't the given for you like it is for me that you're going to eat? How about sleep? Is that kind of a given?
That's a given.
What about exercise? You don't have to answer, but the point is most Americans,
They don't even think about it.
They don't even think about it. It's something they add, or maybe if they have time. Native American